Shivaji Rao is a cameraman at a television station called QTV. His father wanted him to be a politician, but he never actually liked the world of politics because for him, politics are trash. His mother, on the other hand, is very proud of his job as one of the television crew. Long story short, Shivaji, with two of his fellow TV crew, Tapi and Urmila, was assigned to cover the activities of the Prime Minister of India, Balraj Chauhan. Under his leadership, the bureaucracy things didn't go well and corruption occurred in all sectors of the government, including him and his ministers. His secretary, Bansal, was forced beyond his conscience to follow the wishes of the Prime Minister. That day, Chauhan was visiting some villages for his campaign when suddenly, one of the people there wanted to shake hands with him. That was when his true nature could be seen. He refused to shake hands with him at first, but after he got into his car, he immediately called that man back, only to jam that man's hand and break it with his car's window. He then went to another village while Shivaji and his friends were still following him. In front of everyone, Chauhan behaved like a wise man and asked the contractor about the current streetlight construction. The contractor said that it was already installed a year ago. Suddenly, a girl named Manjari came and denied what the contractor just said. The truth was the streetlights had just been installed the day before and it was not even connected to electricity yet. Hearing that, Chauhan immediately told the contractor to power all the lights. Sadly, he later told the contractor to cut off the electricity after 2 days because the contractor wanted to use the electricity for his own good. Turned out that the contractor was one of Chauhan's biggest contributors to his campaign in the election. Later that day, in the middle of the city, a group of students was waiting for public transportation. A bus then passed by the bus stop, but it didn't stop. The students then ran after it and managed to stop it at an intersection. The students were forced to enter the bus, but the driver prevented them, even pushed them, and made one of the students there fall and hit his head on the asphalt. Due to that incident, all of the students there went mad, causing chaos there. The chaos ended up stopping the traffic and got worse. Shivaji, who was there, immediately recorded the incident. The crowd got bigger, causing an endless traffic jam. Even though the police chief was there, he could barely do anything. He then called the Prime Minister and asked for permission to do something. Shockingly, Chauhan told him to do nothing about it and let everything be as it is. He said both sides were important for his campaign. The bus driver was a worker from a public transportation company that belongs to his party, while the students were a big part of his supporters. He didn't want to side with any of them because it would greatly impact his campaign. Bansal tried to give him a suggestion, but he didn't care at all. He just let the riot get worse. He told Bansal that they would eventually stop after they tired of attacking each other. On the other hand, Shivaji managed to capture many important moments of the incident. While recording the commotion, Shivaji saw a student lying down unconsciously. He tried to help by carrying him to the nearest hospital. Thankfully, the man was saved. It turned out that his heroic act was recorded by Topi and went viral across the country. Even Chauhan himself gave him an award for his heroic act. Everyone loved his action, especially Manjari, the girl from the village that Shivaji visited during Chauhan's campaign. Meanwhile, in his office, Shivaji was promoted to senior journalist for his work. Since his visit to Manjari's village, he kept thinking about her, especially because he was able to capture her face. He kept thinking about her and decided to return to the village and meet her. As time went by, their relationship got closer until finally Shivaji dared himself to propose to her. Unfortunately, her father refused him and said that he wanted his daughter to marry a civil servant. One day at the office, Shivaji was called by the chief editor. He was told that the TV station had made him an exclusive live show and had appointed him to interview the Prime Minister himself for his first broadcast. He was very surprised and nervous to hear that since he had never done a live broadcast before. Moreover, the one he was going to interview was none other than the Prime Minister, the #1 person in the country. Thankfully, the chief editor managed to convince him to do the show. The awaited day finally came. Shivaji was still nervous. He kept practicing in front of a mirror to perfect his show. Chauhan finally arrived at the TV station and the show finally started. Shivaji started the show smoothly and began asking some questions regarding the Prime Minister's programs that he promised during his campaign, which sadly never came to reality. Chauhan replied that since he was elected as the Prime Minister, every family in the country had a TV in their home and every village had a telephone network, even an internet connection. Everyone got to experience what it feels like to ride their vehicle, wear decent shoes, and even eat at the famous McDonald's, and those were just a couple of many advancements that the community could experience. Shivaji denied it and said that the truth was far from that. Most of the farmers in the country were in famine. They could barely eat twice a day, let alone eat at McDonald's. No workers used any vehicles and they had to work extra hard under the hot sun. While the wealthy people got richer, the poor got even more miserable. Many even became a beggar to provide for their families. Chauhan replied that the GDP had increased by 60% since he led the country. Shivaji agreed that the country's GDP had increased and even mentioned 2 regions that increased by 90%. But sadly, along with that, the crime rate has also increased. Shivaji also mentioned that despite the increasing GDP, many laborers only had 3 rupees per day income, a very small number. Chauhan denied that and told Shivaji to gather concrete information before all those, but Shivaji then issued several reports that he had found regarding his statement. Seems like he was well prepared for the interview. He then said that according to his studies, the loans that the World Bank had given to the government were mostly spent by the ministers, causing the refusal from the World Bank for another loan issued by India. Chauhan said that the World Bank was currently embargoing the state, but he couldn't explain it when asked. He instead said that he would rather explain it to the community since it was too complicated to explain. Shivaji challenged him to explain it and told him that society was watching him on their own TV so he could explain it from the show. Shivaji then moved on and asked Chauhan about his last job before he was elected as the Prime Minister. Chauhan replied that he was working as a farmer. Shivaji then asked how much he gathered from working as a farmer, and Chauhan replied that he got 18,000 rupees per month. Shivaji then explained that impossible for him to have a 5 billion rupee property with that monthly income. Chauhan was angry and told him to submit the case to the court if he wanted to know more about it. After that, Shivaji played the video during the riot a while ago between the bus drivers from his party's public transportation company and a large group of students. He also showed the footage where Chauhan told the police chief to let the riot attack each other and did nothing. The incident managed to cause billions of rupees worth of casualties and many injuries and even claimed the rioters' lives. Chauhan said that all were nothing but baseless accusations. He then took a moment to sip his drink. He looked panicked and couldn't say anything to reply to the accusations. He then ordered the staff to turn off the camera. One of his men started acting violently and asked the TV crew to stop broadcasting. Bansal then told him that everything they did was broadcast live and that everyone throughout the country could see what they did. After saying that, the man suddenly calmed down. Chauhan then told his staff and Bansal to leave the broadcasting room, but before he could leave the room, Shivaji stopped him and told him to explain everything to the public. Chauhan made an alibi that the voice that was recorded was not him, but someone else. He even accused Shivaji, who did this only to attack him. He then challenged Shivaji to play his role as the Prime Minister for a day to understand the difficulties of being a Prime Minister. Shivaji was shocked to hear that and almost lost it until he finally agreed after being pushed by Chauhan. That moment made everyone cheer for him. Chauhan on the other side was annoyed and immediately left the place. The next day, Chauhan submitted his resignation letter, as well as a letter signed by all members of parliament, making Shivaji the legal Prime Minister for one day. Without wasting time, Shivaji immediately asked Bansal, the Prime Minister's secretary, to immediately gather the heads of the ministers for a meeting. Without any further ado, he immediately explained the 3 main points that made their country poor. He asked all the ministers to collect all complaints from the public regarding the performance of the officials on his desk in an hour. Bansal asked what all the names were for, and Shivaji replied that he would fire them all. He then headed to the slums. He didn't want to see any slums in his country because, in his opinion, the government must provide for the community, including a place for the people to live. Upon arrival, he immediately fired the property developer in the area who was found to have embezzled housing that should have been given to the community, but instead gave most of it to the politicians. Of the total of 1680 units, only 20 units reached the community. Not only that, it turned out that the 20 houses that had been given to the community were leased back to other people by the recipient of the house because he didn't have a job. This made Shivaji angry, then went straight to the housing and then evicted the tenant. Shortly after, he went to the traditional market and found fraud committed by a merchant there. He then revoked the person's trading license. Through the media, Shivaji also gave a public complaint number which was open for an hour and was handled directly by himself. Right after he opened the complaint number, he immediately got his first caller. The caller complained about the bad service she got from a hospital. The slow service by the doctor in that hospital made her child's condition worse. He then asked the caller to give the phone to the hospital staff. He then sent a resignation letter to the doctor and asked Bansal to find a substitute doctor to treat the child. Another caller complained that the police in her area had not responded to her report since a month ago of the loss of a motorcycle. Shivaji then contacted the police office, and after confirming the case and the police's attitude, he immediately fired the policeman. The next caller was a student who complained about a group of thugs who always disturbed women on the campus. Unfortunately, the police did nothing about it and kept quiet about the problem. Thinking this was a serious problem, Shivaji then came to the campus and found that a student was injured due to the riot that the thugs had done. It turned out that this was because the police did not dare to arrest the thug's leader because of his cruelty and very strong relations with the government. Besides, he also did not get permission from the police chief. Hearing that, Shivaji immediately fired the two of them. Shivaji went straight to the thug leader's residence and fought them himself. He then arrested all of them. After all that, Shivaji returned to the office and found the names of the officials who received complaints from the community piled on his desk. He then ordered a Bansal to fire all 45,500 officials. Lastly, before his term ended, he headed for the residence of the former Prime Minister Chauhan. He secured 12 ministers for the act of corruption. Shivaji finally ordered the police to arrest the root of all the problems, Chauhan himself. For that single day, Shiva managed to solve many problems that Chauhan could never solve, but since he only had a single day and could continue his work as the Prime Minister, Chauhan was freed by the police and given back his position as the Prime Minister. Later that day, when Shivaji was on his way home, he was attacked by some thugs and beaten up. He was almost killed, but thankfully he managed to get away. It turned out that a stallkeeper knew him and saved him. He looked very happy to see Shivaji. He then called everyone to see Shivaji for themselves. Someone then poured a jug of milk to clean the mud that soaked Shivaji's body. The next day, Shivaji was going to meet his lover, Manjari. He met a group of farmers in the village. They were very happy to meet Shivaji. They even gave a little of their crops as an expression of gratitude because thanks to Shivaji, the farmers now no longer have to deal with the middlemen who always keep their prices down and can now directly sell their crops to the government and more profit. Manjari, his lover, looked sad because just like the other, she also wanted to give Shivaji something as gratitude, but sadly, she had nothing to give. Shivaji then told her that he needed nothing more than her love and trust to make him happy. Sometime later, the QT office was attacked by some thugs hired by Chauhan. He didn't accept being humiliated by Shivaji. Everything was destroyed at the office. They also beat Shiva until he was unconscious. Back in Shivaji's house, Shivaji's parents complained about the tap water and electricity that was suddenly cut off. The telephone network also stopped working. They found out that their house was the only house that was cut off. Shortly after, someone from the government brought an order to demolish their house because the building violated the rules. It was nothing more than a trick from Chauhan to make Shivaji's life miserable. Shivaji, who returned home after being treated, found his mother and father outside of his already destroyed house. Shivaji then asked his father to calm down his mother. Meanwhile, he planned to report Chauhan's actions to the police and wanted to resolve the case through the court, but sadly, his intention was prevented by the Bansal. He said that what Shivaji was doing would only end up being a pile of complaints that caught dust and left unsolved. He said that the best way to end all the chaos was for Shivaji to run for Prime Minister again in the upcoming elections, but Shivaji refused because he had never been interested in politics at all. Hearing that, Bansal was disappointed and immediately left from there. The next day, Bansal returned to Shivaji's house with tons of people who wanted to support him and tens of journalists waiting for him in front of his house. Bansal hadn't given up on convincing Shivaji to run for Prime Minister and realizing the hopes of all the people in that country. Many party leaders wanted to take the opportunity to invite him to join their party, but Shivaji refused all the offers and said that he would instead participate in the selection of prospective civil servants. With disappointment and anger, Bansal then brought him to see how much people hoped to see him as the Prime Minister, a presence of a long-awaited leader, the presence of a leader who would change their fate. They had long lost faith in the figure of leader until Shivaji appeared to give them hope. Shivaji then met a disabled boy who begged him to run for Prime Minister. Finally, with full confidence, Shivaji was determined to run for the election. He was greeted with joy by all the people there. He founded a party to pave his way to the highest leadership position in the country and finally managed to get the most votes. In his leadership, Shivaji invited all his ministers to work the way he did when he became Prime Minister and one day before. He said he would punish the wrong and do justice to the people. He immediately conveyed his programs to the people and instructed them not to hesitate to make complaints as he was committed that the problem would be resolved within a maximum of 1 week. Even Shivaji often disguised himself to find those who committed fraud or harmed the community. But of course, this leadership brings Chauhan, who couldn't accept defeat, did various ways to test Shivaji's leadership, starting from spreading terror to carrying out bombing attempts in various areas which were ultimately thwarted. Until one night, Shivaji got a call from someone, but he got no signal, so he went outside. That was when he was informed that someone planted a bomb inside his house, and a moment later, the bomb exploded, claiming both his parents. That incident put vengeance in his heart toward Chauhan. Shivaji, with his vengeance, went to Chauhan's house the very next morning and promised to him to revenge for his parents' death. That complaint put anger in Chauhan as he started terrors by carrying out bombings in various areas, but fortunately, Shivaji quickly dealt with it and casualties were avoided. All the bombs were defused, but when questioned, Chauhan cleverly said that it was just a trick from Shivaji because he didn't like the strong three-party coalition of the opposition. Knowing he couldn't touch Chauhan the easy way, Shivaji decided to frame Chauhan for shooting his arm when he invited him to his office. The guards in the office came and immediately shot Chauhan dead for assaulting Shivaji. Shivaji felt guilty for doing this, but Bansal supported him because this had to be done to clean the politics of those who could harm the community. When he was treated after the incident, Manjari came with her father. Her father said that he blessed both Shivaji and Manjari. Since then, Shivaji led the government fairly.